Welcome to this conversation with Ian Maclean. He is the head of strategy at the Mavenir System, and I am Monica Paolini with Sensafili. And this conversation is part of a report on NFV and the ecosystem that is growing alongside. And today we're going to talk about Mavenir solution in for IMS, voice over LTE, RCS. And specifically, we will talk about how they're helping operators to do the transition towards NFV. Ian, welcome, and thanks for taking the time to participate in this interview.
Hi, Monica. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today.
So let's get started, and maybe you can give us an introduction about Mavenir's position in the industry and specifically with respect to NFV.
Sure. Mavenir Systems is a leading supplier of 4G IP core networking solutions for mobile operators. We're focused on helping mobile operators transform their networks from existing legacy technologies to next generation 4G LTE. The transformation that operators are going through fundamentally consists of two major transitions in the industry, one of which is the adoption of all IP technology, which encompasses both VoLTE, voice over LTE, and rich communications solutions. Voice over LTE is implementing existing services such as voice and text messaging services on next generation all IP technology. It's based on the IMS standard. Rich communication is really the addition or enablement of new services on the operator networks, new services which are comparable to what we're all accustomed to from internet service providers such as Skype, etc. That's also based on the IMS standard. So that's one major transition, is the introduction of services over 4G LTE on all IP technologies. And the second major transition that's taking place is that as operators are building out these next generation networks, they're leveraging existing technologies that are available and proven in the IT world, for example, such as virtualization, to build these next generation networks better and more efficiently and more cost effectively than they built the previous generations of networks. And that's what obviously we're excited to talk with you about today.
Yes, so maybe you can tell me, Mavenir has been one of one of the most aggressive players in the NFV in trying to push this forward. What was your motivation to move that way?
Yeah, the industry was really galvanized around NFV, and that took place really with some a standard, ETCA taking the lead in terms of standardization effort in late 2012. However, we began to look at the use of virtualization technology ahead of that in 2011, 2012 timeframe, and saw the impact that virtualization could have in terms of enabling new services on these next generation networks. To that end, we've embraced virtualization as a means to implement IMS core network elements, application servers in a way that provides the operators greater flexibility in terms of how they deploy these products into their networks, faster time to market for the introduction of new services, greater service agility, and then obviously one of the things that I think operators understand and what's intuitively well understood is the delivery and implementation of these products in a software model. And what that means is that they're able to take software from vendors, such as Mavenir, and implement them on industry standard general purpose compute platforms that they may procure directly from platform suppliers such as an HP, a Cisco, etc. And that's fundamentally unlocking and changing the price model that traditional wireless vendors have had over this past couple of decades, which is typically charging price premiums for purpose-built hardware that meets the scale and the requirements that operators have for scale and reliability. The reality is that the advances in general purpose computing have been sufficiently strong and compelling that scale and reliability can be met now on general purpose compute platforms. And what they're really looking for is nimble and innovative suppliers that can provide best-in-breed software applications on these platforms. The platforms will help the application scale, but they're still looking for feature-rich, innovative solutions, that they can bring to their networks and bring to their customers.
Initially, there was a lot of talk that as you go to virtualization, you might have to take a little bit of a hit in terms of performance, so there was a trade-off. But what I'm hearing more and more is that we're actually, there's no such a trade-off to be made anymore in terms of performance. Can you tell us a little bit about how the transition was? Was it a different transition, and what is the performance like on a virtualized versus non-virtualized platform?
Yeah, we can speak about that briefly. The initial, I would say, the understanding in terms of the performance of movement of virtualization model has progressed. It's more clear now within the industry, and certainly based on our experiences of having delivered commercial solutions, having deployed our virtualized solutions in for commercial services, we have some real data points from live networks today. I think initially we were thinking 2 or 3 years ago that virtualization may have a performance impact on transactional capacity in the order of magnitude of 20, 25, 30%, 30% maybe being in the worst case. What we're actually seeing in operator networks, to a degree depending on the actual application, that the performance impact is more in the order of 10% or less. So it's actually relatively nominal, and we're seeing very comparable performance and of our solutions, whether they be deployed on purpose-built hardware or hardware platforms such as ATCA, in what's called a bare metal model, which means our application software runs directly on natively on the CPUs, on the carrier-grade Linux operating systems, for example, versus our application software running in a virtualized environment, whether that be using hypervisors such as KVM or vSphere if it's from VMware, running on general purpose compute platforms. So roughly it's about twice as better than what we thought it would be. Instead of 20 to 25%, it's about a 10% impact.
Right, and so as you just mentioned, an operator has the option now to deploy your solution both on ATCA, in a virtualized environment as well. So can you tell us a little bit about how you helping operators do the transition, because it's going to be a gradual transition for most operators. How can you support them in that effort?
Yeah, well, the strategy that we're espousing today with mobile operators is that they can actually begin to leverage virtualization and take advantage of some of the benefits that NFV provides using virtualization and get those benefits now. A benefit that I just described is the transition to a software-based pricing model where they buy best-in-breed software only, and then they buy industry standard compute platforms directly from platform suppliers. So they get the immediate benefit of an improved cost structure for buying hardware and software. So that's an immediate benefit that they can realize. By going to virtualization, they can realize the benefit of deployment flexibility, service agility, etc. These are the benefits. And the way we're saying that you can begin to leverage those benefits today is to start one step at a time. And with the understanding that the NFV framework does introduce new components, such as the NFV orchestrator, NFV management, the concept of an NFV infrastructure layer, if you will, all of which are evolving as the NFV ecosystem matures. But within that framework, there's the concept of a VNF. A VNF is a virtualized network function. Well, a virtualized network function is really no different than an individual network element that a operator would have in their network today, such as a telephony application server, session border controller, a packet gateway, etc. Today, those network elements are implemented in a hardware-based model, and they connect to the surrounding network via logical interfaces. What we're suggesting and what we're enabling is operators to deploy a TAS, a PGW, an SBC in a virtualized model that will still talk to the surrounding network elements over the same logical interfaces, but which will be instantiated as a software solution. So it will be application software residing in on a virtualized layer on a general purpose compute platform. And in this model, operators can really begin to evolve their network and migrate their network towards NFV, one network element at a time. And then in the next step, as the NFV ecosystem matures and the orchestrator becomes available, that orchestrator can be added later on, and then the existing VNF, in this case, as I mentioned several examples, can be upgraded with an interface to interwork with the existing orchestrator. So you get the benefits of NFV now by leveraging virtualization, and then you have a very seamless and smooth migration path towards a fully compliant NFV framework and architecture, as the network evolves forward.
Right. So now they have the initial benefits, the major benefits, and then the range of benefits is going to expand with time as they increase the scope of virtualization. And I think that's very good in terms of reducing the risk and being able to focus on one function at a time. It seems to be much more manageable. But from your point of view, it also requires working with a lot of partners to make sure that then when they move to virtualization, all the pieces fall into place. So what are you doing in that direction?
Correct. I mean, really, just to sort of maybe baseline where the NFV ecosystem stands today, I think there's two aspects of NFV that are maturing. One is the introduction of this critical new element for NFV, which is the orchestrator. We're seeing that there are a large number of vendors that are supplying the NFV orchestrators. And what will have to happen is that the VNFs from numerous software suppliers, such as Mavenir, will have to interwork to the orchestrator. The key role that the orchestrator provides in the NFV framework is that it arbitrates all of the requests for computing resources from the different VNFs or the application software in a multi-vendor ecosystem. So it plays a very critical role to make certain that there's a policy for allowing one application to scale up while other applications may need to scale down in order to share a common underlying virtualized platform, if you will. So that's a key element in how that orchestrator, how we talk to that orchestrator, something that Mavenir is currently working on as these different third parties are developing their orchestrators. We're really seeing that they are the different third parties from, again, I mentioned the likes of some of the platform suppliers, such as an HP, a Cisco, et cetera. Some of the major telco suppliers, Ericsson, and others, are also developing orchestrators. And so, as operators begin to select their third-party orchestrators, different VNFs will have to interwork to these third-party orchestrators. So that's some interoperability that will have to take place. Generally speaking, the orchestrators are being productized in 2014, and we'll see that there's more and more interoperability and integration that will begin to occur in the 2015 and beyond timeframe. The other aspect to the NFV maturity is the availability of all the different software components, and so all the VNFs, if you will. So what the vendor community is working on is the implementation of all of the different network elements in a software model. And so that's one of the things that Mavenir provides, where our entire IMS and EPC-based portfolio of products and solutions are available today. So the interoperability, which I mentioned towards the orchestrators, is something that we're doing across our entire portfolio. And that's also something that the industry will be doing over the course of the next 1 or 2 years.
Yeah. Now, why don't we talk about now back to today? What is that the operators can do today? And clearly, this is early days, but can you share with us a little bit about what's your experience in working with operators? What are they learning? What is it they like? What is that they find more challenging?
Yeah. Great question. So I mentioned some of the benefits earlier around the improved cost equation by lowering basically their hardware costs, changing the pricing models. So that's an immediate benefit that operators are realizing. We have a commercially deployed RCS solution, which is delivered in a virtualized model. And for our customer that launched this solution in the first half of 2013, we were able to demonstrate roughly a 40% savings just in terms of CapEx over what they would have spent in a more traditional model. So that's an immediate benefit which they realized. That's one. Number two is greater deployment flexibility. So, for example, this very same customer was able to implement their RCS solution in a single centralized platform, which is shared by across countries, and they were able to achieve a pan-European rollout of their solution. So this gave them the flexibility and time to market advantage of having to deploy a solution once in one country versus deploying a solution n times across n countries. So that's an example of greater deployment flexibility that was realized by leveraging virtualization now. And then service agility is another important topic, and that's an example of that is the ability to introduce a service quickly as software. Let's say software is software as a service, if you will. And the way that virtualization and the migration to NFV facilitates that being different is that we're able to provide software onto an existing platform. So an operator can say, you know, listen, I've already got available hardware platforms in X country, in a specific region or a specific office. And if you can provide the software, we can actually get started right away with the software integration. We don't have to deal with hardware installation and commissioning. We don't have to deal with, you know, the regulatory requirements and the mechanical requirements, so on and so forth with deploying hardware. It's already available. We're able to show up with software and services and get started with the deployment immediately. One of the experiences that we have in this model is that we're able to actually launch, again, another RCS solution within 3 months of actually starting a project. Normally, in a hardware-based model, that would take a minimum of 6 months because you have to actually deploy hardware into the captive office, and that simply just takes time, given many mobile operator operational requirements and procedures today. So we're able to actually short-circuit a lot of the standard operational procedures and get started with the actual acceptance and verification of software and achieve commercial launch much faster.
Yeah. So, and that really gives the sort of flexibility for an operator to start small, see how it goes, and then expand quickly as they need, and without having to overbuild their network, just to make sure there is capacity. So this is
and that's a really good point, Monica. And I'll just I gave 2 examples of an RCS-based solution starting in this model, and that's a perfect example. You know, when I actually talked from the outset that VoLTE really is about implementing existing services on new all-IP technology. Well, RCS is about introducing new services. And in many cases, operators, you know, because they're new services, the business model is a little bit more difficult to actually show the incremental revenue and the revenue generation for these new services because they're unproven in the operator's network. And that's where virtualization is really helping operators improve the business case because it's lowering the cost. It's lowering the cost. And so in the business case equation, yeah, maybe the revenue is harder to prove and the top line is harder to prove, but I can my solutions using virtualization provide a better bottom line. And so from that perspective, it's actually a key enabler for new and unproven and innovative services and technologies which operators are looking to innovate and provide new services and create value for the subscribers. So it's very, very critical in terms of the overall equation for operators to compete effectively in this new world where they're really looking at competing with Google, Apple, Facebook, so on and so forth.
And these players are much faster traditionally than they are. So
oh yeah, absolutely.
The ability to introduce new services, see if they work, maybe they won't, and they can just move on. So no, that's quite interesting. Now there is some discussion also on for an operator, should they go and virtualize the EPC or the IMS first or at the same time? What's your view on that?
Well, there's you know, when you look at the technology, the conventional thinking is that non-real-time applications, non-real-time processing. Rather, processing for non-real-time applications is a logical candidate for virtualization. if there's any degree of performance impact due to the processing of packets due to virtualization, then applications which are more signaling centric would be less sensitive and less impacted to that model. So from that perspective, IMS is typically considered a logical domain to be virtualized. IMS is typically very signaling. Many of the network elements are very signaling intensive. And so many applications, IMS-based application servers and functions are being virtualized. EPC, from a packet processing perspective, as I mentioned, the performance impact is less than I think what we thought it was 2 or 3 years ago. It's in the neighborhood of 10%. So even some of the heavy data processing and packet processing requirements for EPC network elements are also, we're gaining more confidence that the performance impact is manageable from that perspective. So we're seeing a lot of EPC elements are candidates for virtualization and NFV, as are many of the surrounding functions, the OSS, BSS functions, a lot of the enabling technologies that you'd find in a data network, such as deep packet inspection, and things like that are also candidates for virtualization as well. So many of the operators' IP core networking applications across EPC and IMS are candidates to be virtualized. The one application that remains to, I think, is still being scrutinized by the vendor and operator communities at large relates to transcoding, which is extremely performance intensive. And in that space, we may see that the first generation of virtualization and NFV deployments use dedicated DSP farms for things like audio and video transcoding. Beyond that, though, I see that really a lot of the EPC and IMS applications will perform well in a virtualized environment.
Mm-hmm. Now, the change that NFV introduces is not just technology, it's also cultural, and the relationships between players is going to change. So how is that going to impact, do you think, the position of more specialized players like Mavenir in terms of their relationship with the operators?
Yeah, I think I've always looked at IMS, for example, as a technology which lends itself to plug and play. Is a little bit of a misnomer, but to an option for setting best in breed suppliers for servers. So I do believe that that the domain lends itself to new entrants, best in breed suppliers of specific services which operators will look to deploy in their networks. To that end, there may be an existing IMS core solution that's in play, and these different third parties will have to interwork to those, into that core network. And so, from that perspective, I do see multi-vendor as the new reality within IMS. So I think we're going to see greater openness on the part of the vendor community. Certainly, I do think that. This migration to a software-based model is a discontinuity and is a tremendous opportunity for companies such as Mavenir, such as ourselves, who have a fully virtualized software-based portfolio. Everything that we're providing can be implemented in a virtualized environment. As I said, some of the components of the NFV framework are not available today. That shouldn't stop any operator from deploying software-based solution and leveraging the benefits that I mentioned earlier. So I see there are opportunities for new entrants, and then I see there being an opportunity for a full end-to-end supplier such as Mavenir building out a fully virtualized software-based networking solution.
Mm-hmm. So if we were to look at what's going to happen in the next 5 years, what should we expect from Mavenir, and what do you see that the industry is going to do over the next 5 years?
I've been mostly first thing, Monica, let me answer your question. You can expect great things from Mavenir as we continue to work with several leading tier 1 major operators globally. But what I've been most, I guess, pleasantly surprised with by the industry in the past 12 plus months is the speed of change. It's how rapidly operators are moving from a hardware-based model to a software-based model. I'm seeing that operators are shedding some of their, historical preconceptions around service level agreement, not preconceptions, but concerns around service level agreements, and requiring one throat to choke and requiring a single vendor that can provide, hardware and software. I'm seeing a greater acceptance of a new model where they will deploy the virtualized data center equipment themselves. Then they'll go and select, as I said, best-in-breed software suppliers to implement telco solutions. So I think there's definitely a transition underway, which will bring about change very, very rapidly. I think within 3 to 5 years, you'll see that companies that are very traditional and still providing hardware-based solutions will become relatively irrelevant in a 3 to 5 year time period. That the only significant players which will remain standing are those who are providing fully virtualized software-based solutions. And I think it's going to, companies that don't really fully virtualize their portfolios very aggressively and very quickly will really be challenged, I think, as operators are building out their networks. And it's going to happen a lot more quickly than I think people realize.
Yeah, and the pace of transition among vendors is actually quite uneven how things shape up. Well, Ian, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
I appreciate it, Monica. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.